Folks, I have not done this before. I'm a wee bit nervous, so you're going to have to bear with me. Um, I just to let you know how this came about. I undertook to do a PhD at Queen's, and it was a taught PhD. Um, so you had 8 modules, and then you did a 50,000 word thesis, which is slightly different if you did the PhD on a full-time basis, where you would do 90,000 words. So I was able to, when I was doing it, remain in post, which I thought was excellent. And it took me approximately 9 years to do it. And the reason why I'm telling you that is it'll come a wee bit clearer just as we move on. So this perspective on the model attachment practice is from my thesis, and I just want to thank a lot of Queen staff, but particularly a guy called Davey Hayes and Jerry Marshall, who were my tutors. They were absolutely excellent. And I just want to thank the residential childcare staff and the Western Trust, who gave of their time to participate in the research, because without them, I couldn't have done it. The reason why I'm telling you that is that because my research started some 5 years ago, basically, MAP has now been superseded by the Northern Ireland Framework for Therapeutic Care. And I know some people maybe were just wondering, had it? It has. So it's no longer the model of practice in the Western Trust, and we are involved along with the other trusts in implementing the Northern Ireland Framework for therapeutic care. Both models focus on the trauma-informed practice and neurodevelopment as a means of understanding and enhancing a therapeutic response to children and young people. Basically, one of the mantras for MAP and for the therapeutic care is you're moving from control to connection with the young people. So in relation to the Northern Ireland Framework for Therapeutic Care, this was developed following a review of regional facilities for children and young people in Northern Ireland, undertaken in 2018, which recommended that a single therapeutic approach for residential childcare be developed to enable children's home staff across the 5 trusts to support manage children's behaviour and prevent escalation to regional secure facilities. So we were, as long with our trusts, involved in the development of the Northern Ireland Framework. So really just to clarify that. One of the motivations I had for doing this PhD and for doing the thesis and completing the thesis was to ascertain if any of my findings could help in the development of the framework. And part of this is about trying to share some of my findings. And also it was to try and prove that despite the criticism of this sector has received over quite a number of years, that residential childcare still and can offer a very valuable service to some of our most traumatized, looked after young people. And also it was very important for me to hear the residential childcare staff's view on practice, which in the research world is actually underrepresented in research literature. So hopefully this has helped give voice to some of our staff in residential childcare. I have to tell you, I'm very wary of being seen as an expert, but as I say, I will share my findings. And just to give you an idea of who I am, my name is Tom Cassidy, as you know. I am currently the Director of Children and Families in the Western Health and Social Care Trust and Executive Director of Social Work as well. I've been a social worker for more years than I care to imagine, slightly over 40, believe it or not. And I've worked in London for 10 years at the start of my career in a generic intake and community team, and dealt with all aspects: children, older people, mental health. And back in the day, I was an ASW. So, and then since I've come back from Ireland, I've worked exclusively in the childcare world. from senior social worker right up to this position. So I'm fairly well experienced in that context, just to give you an idea of who I am. So I run through this relatively quickly, I think, and certainly if there are questions, I would be more than willing to take them and answer them. So feel free to do it if you want to. So could you put slide 2 on, Alison? Okay. So the model of attachment practice is a therapeutic model of practice that was introduced in the Western Health and Social Care Trust. And this followed a regional child protection report in 2006, Our Children and Young People, Our Shared Responsibility, which identified inconsistencies in practice across Northern Ireland, including residential childcare. In 2007, the DHSS advocated the adoption of therapeutic approaches in residential childcare, and each trust was asked to identify a therapeutic model. The Belfast Trust identified social pedagogy, the Northern Trust Care, which is care and residential experiences, the Southeastern Trust Sanctuary, the Southern Trust ARC, attachment, regulation and competency, and the Western Trust MAP, the model of attachment practice. In 2007, the Western Trust was newly established, and I was appointed as assistant director, and one of my responsibilities was for residential childcare. And in the old Foyle Trust, the legacy Foyle Trust, I had managed residential childcare for 10 years at that stage. During this process, I became aware of a relational-based practice approach in a children's home in the legacy Sperrin Lakeland Trust, which was developed by a senior social worker and a psychologist. It was informed by attachment theory research and neurological development to help understand trauma and the resultant impact on young people's behaviour. I visited the home and I spoke to the senior social worker and the psychologist, and I was so impressed by what they were doing is that I asked the two workers to do a presentation to myself and the senior management team within the newly established Western Health and Social Care Trust. And we decided to go forward on the basis of their work. So I really can't thank the two people who developed the practice. I can't thank them enough. As it says on the slide there, MAP is the only homegrown model of the 5 therapeutic practice models introduced in Northern Ireland. And the fundamental objective of the model was to allow staff to connect with young children and young people in a more positive and productive way within residential childcare. So, Alice, could you go to the next slide? Okay. So, as I said, it was a homegrown model of practice, and I had to, discuss with the chief social worker at the time and the department about the fact that we were going to go with this homegrown model. There was some anxiety, just slight anxiety, as to whether or not we should do that. It was a homegrown model, but I was convinced after having met the 2 members of staff and seen their presentation and heard it that this was the way that we wanted to go. But what we needed to do is we needed to develop the practice started in the children's home into a model of practice. And in order to help us do that, we looked at implementation science to give us pointers as to how best to do it. So one of the things that implementation science taught us was that you needed to identify the group of staff who were most critical to your implementation efforts. So what needs to work for whom and how does it work, and what group of staff were the main actors in this? And we agreed that MAP needed, if it was going to work, it needed to work for our residential childcare staff group, because they would be the group that would take it forward and would deliver on the objectives of MAP. Behavioural change is central to the implementation of the model, and it is the residential childcare staff group who will have to either add, remove, or replace actions that they did in the past to ensure positive implementation of the model. And the more complex the practice innovation being implemented, the more social interaction and involvement of stakeholders is needed. Within the Western Trust, we had 6 homes that we initially developed it in, and we therefore needed to ensure that the staff group, the residential staff group, were well informed and brought forward to it. The Trust recognised that the participation and engagement of the residential childcare staff group was a central component to the implementation process. It was important to support the key stakeholders then in the process with education, training, engagement, and to provide a feedback loop. The main elements of the strategy that we developed were, we developed a manual, and again, the senior social worker who was involved in it became we freed that person up from their role in the children's home to be the implementation lead for MAP, and he did an absolutely fantastic job. So the main elements of the strategy were, we developed a manual which staff would consult, and in relation to research terms, a manual is recommended in relation to helping staff understand what it is that we were trying to do with them, and why we were trying to do with them. We also developed a suite of training, which was an attempt to explain, clarify, and debate the core principles and building blocks of the MAP model. So we needed to explain to the residential childcare staff why we were implementing this model and what the benefits of it would be for them. And the training was really implemental, was really crucial in implementing this. And we also developed a supervision tool for residential childcare called the MAP Supervision Reflective Tool, MERST. And we also developed support mechanisms for the implementation. So for instance, we had a number of different meetings post-implementation, and one of them was like a fortnightly meeting with our psychologists, with the staff, in order to discuss issues that may have cropped up, debate them, and being able to feed back. And that meeting was extremely important. It wasn't a management meeting as such, but it was more of a collective supportive meeting to talk to people about some of the issues that were arising. And we developed a core team, and I think this is important. We developed a core team who had extensive experience in residential childcare practice to facilitate the implementation of MAP and engage closely with the residential staff group throughout the process. And I think looking back on it, I think that was absolutely crucial. So the staff, the residential childcare staff group, could recognise the expertise that these people already had in residential childcare, and gave a sort of gravitas to what we were trying to do. So that is I think a really important process. And we also engaged other staff. So we engaged our fieldwork staff, etc., to explain to them the type of processes that we were developing within residential childcare, because on occasions, the process that we were taking could have been perceived by someone in our frontline child protection teams as not really understanding the element of risk that these young people were presenting. So it was important that we did a blended approach to this, and all of these issues would have been backed up by the implementation science, which gave us a good understanding of what was needed to implement this process. So could you go on to slide 4, Alison, if you wouldn't mind? So the aims of the research were outlined below, and the core thing I wanted to do in relation to this was to gauge residential childcare staff's understanding of MAP and its core concepts. So the training, as I've outlined, was developed in order to try and do that. And again, thinking back to what implementation science told us, is that if the residential childcare staff group, firstly don't understand, the core concepts of MAP, and don't realize how beneficial they could be in relation to practice, then the whole MAP idea would be lost. The second aim was did it make a difference to practice within the residential children's homes in the Western Trust? So for me as a senior manager and as a student at Queen's in a research, what I wanted to know was, did it make difference? Did it make a blind bit of difference to the practice? Because if it didn't, then what was the point of it? So we needed to ensure that as best we could, did it make a difference in residential childcare practice? And moving on from that, then what exactly did it do? Did it improve relationships within the residential childcare teams? And don't forget that residential childcare is a 24/7 operation. So the complexity of developing relationships in that sort of 24-hour clock was extremely difficult. So we needed to ensure that what we were doing, did it help staff improve relationships? And most importantly, did it help in promoting positive outcomes for the children and young people in the sector? So those aims throughout the entire research process, I had to keep at the very forefront of my mind in order to ensure that where the research was going, was it fulfilling the aims of the research at the very start. So Alison, could you move on to the next one? Okay, so the research design that I developed, again with the help of my tutors at Queen's, was first of all a mixed methods approach. And what that means is that it involves both quantitative methods and qualitative methods. So the quantitative, for people that maybe don't know it, is sort of hard data if you can get it, and the qualitative element is what people's understanding of it. More of a how do they perceive it, what do they do. So the approach that I adopted was, I say, a mixed methods approach. So it involved questionnaires and semi-structured interviews. I sent 86 questionnaires, which at the time was all the residential childcare staff. And it was so important to try and get all the residential childcare staff, because young people can make relationships with anyone, cooks, cleaners, wherever it happens to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be qualified social work staff. So it was very important for me as a researcher to try and get an understanding from the whole residential childcare staff group. And what happened then was that out of the 86, I had 36 returned, which was a 42% return. Out of that, and what I had in the questionnaires was a section at the end of it was, would staff be willing to be interviewed by me? And we had 15 staff who filled in the questionnaires, then were interviewed in a semi-structured interview with myself. So 42% of the staff group returned questionnaires, and 17% of the entire residential, that was 17% of the entire residential staff group were interviewed by me. One of the big issues I had to deal with in this aspect was my position as what they call an insider in this process. And I was the manager who was ultimately responsible for residential childcare. So in that sense, my position could have influenced staff or maybe influenced them to tell me what I wanted to hear, if you know what I mean. So I had to be very careful that I dealt with this as best I could. So in relation to that, I I met with, first of all, the managers of residential childcare to explain to them, what I was trying to do, and to get an understanding of them if they felt it was appropriate, and they did. I went to each children's home and met with each group of staff, and I went to it when they had their weekly team meetings. So I went to all the groups of staff, and I explained to them as best I could that I was undertaking this research as a student at Queen's, not as their senior manager. That if they didn't want to take part, that was fine. There was no issue. If you didn't want to take part, that wasn't a problem. It wouldn't have any indication for for your employment. And I also asked them, to be absolutely honest about what they felt. Not to tell me that what I wanted to hear or whatever that. So I was very conscious of explaining to them that that it was voluntary, that their confidentiality would be respected. I wouldn't know who returned the questionnaires, except for the people who agreed to be semi-structured interviews, and that there would be no comeback from me in any of those issues. What I did was I left the questionnaires in each children's home with a basically an envelope and a cardboard box, and I left them there, and I said, look, I'm going to come back in a fortnight's time, and if you feel like filling them in, could you do it and leave it in that box, and I'll come and collect it in a fortnight's time. So I did that, which with each of the children's homes, and in all honesty, I was worried that I might get 86 responses, and that might sound funny, but the reason why I thought that is if everybody responds, is it because they think that as a senior manager I'm going to be annoyed if they don't or they didn't? But as I said, 36 were returned, and there were 15 semi-structured interviews. So the questionnaires, I used a Likert scale, and for people that don't know what it it's a sort of broad scale going from you totally agree or until you totally disagree. So it's a scale that allows you to sort of say totally agree, not sure, don't agree, totally disagree, that type of thing. And the questionnaire was focused on three aspects. One was understanding the model. Did you believe that you understood the model and the core building blocks and the principles? Training and support for the implementation of MAP. Were they good? Could they be improved? Were they no good? What were they about? And thirdly, the last one was effectiveness and impact on practice. Did it have any effect or impact on practice? The questionnaire was also designed to allow participants to develop their answers to the Likert scale by including a box after each question, asking staff to explain or give reasons for their answers if they wish to do so. So the questionnaire itself was a mixture of both quantitative and qualitative approaches. The semi-structured interviews, they were interviews that can allow interviewers to probe for responses and clarify ambiguities. They allow respondents to give their opinions in full on more complex topics, and they provide rich, from a research perspective, rich and quotable material which enlivens the whole research project. A structured interview is where you have very clear questions and you ask them all in sequence. The semi-structured interview is slightly different, but you do send out to all the staff who are doing the interviews a sort of interview schedule with the types of questions that you're going to be given. So that was sent to everyone as well. The questionnaires, the response to the questionnaires was equally split between male and female, which actually didn't reflect the makeup of the staff group, because there's about 80% female and 20% male in the residential childcare staff group. 53% of the returns were social work qualified staff. The average for people working in the sector was 13 years, and it ranged from people who were under 1 year to people who were over 30 years. The average was to say 13, and the results showed that staff had a very, very good understanding of the principles and the building blocks, and most of the feedback was that over 90% of the staff had extremely good understanding of the principles. And the interviews, again, there were 7 male and 8 female, which again doesn't reflect the gender balance, but as I said, because 80% female and 20% male. The majority again were qualified residential social work staff, and the length of experience of those staff, the median or the average length of experience of those staff was 18 years. And again, it went from people below, I think, 7 years to people over 35 years. And the spread of both the return of the questionnaires and the interviews covered all of the 6 children's homes. It covered managers, covered qualified social work staff, covered ancillary staff, cooks, cleaners, and unqualified social work staff. So from a research perspective, it covered the broad range of people. So Alison, could you move on to the last slide? Okay. I'm going to elaborate on these findings a wee bit, but I just wanted to, again, show you this in relation to the aims of the research. You remember the aims of the research were fourfold. So the findings, the basic findings were that residential childcare staff do have a good understanding of MAP and its core principles. MAP does appear to have made a difference to the practice within the residential children's homes within the Western Health and Social Care Trust. It does appear to have improved relationships within the residential childcare teams, and it does appear to have helped in promoting positive outcomes for the children and young people in the sector. So the main findings, if you think about it, MAP is a relational model of practice. And one of the major findings, which I was delighted about, was the concept of relationships within residential childcare. There were four findings basically, and these were relationships. They were training. What impact did the training have on people? What impact did it have on the professional practice of residential childcare? And what I would term the fourth one was about congruence. And what that means is that there are factors outside the residential children's home that can impact on the ability of residential staff to do their job. And I'll come back to that. But there were four aspects to relationships that came out in the findings. And the first aspect was the relationship that the workers have with the young people, with the young person. And what the finding basically came about was that the relationship between the workers, the worker, the key worker, or the workers, and the young person is absolutely crucial. It's the foundation of everything. And in fact, research would begin to show that the development of relationships is actually an intervention in itself, because the young people who are within residential childcare are some of our most traumatized young people, because they have usually suffered rejection. So in the first instance, they would have suffered rejection from their families of origin because they had to come into care. Quite a high percentage of young people in residential childcare, it was not their first care placement. So that they would have been maybe in a foster care placement and that broke down. So that was being perceived as a rejection again for them. And then they would be placed in residential childcare. So you can understand why some of the behaviors that the young people would exhibit would be difficult, right? And one of the things that the training was to do was to try and help people understand where the behavior was coming from. And one of the major findings in relation to the relationships with the child was a clear understanding from the residential staff that the children's behavior was not aimed at them. It wasn't because the young person disliked them or the young person had any sort of issue with them specifically, but that it was due to past trauma. And as such, when staff began to sort of realize that, they were better able to work with the young person and understand where that young person was coming from. I'll give you a couple of quotes. I mean, one quote is, I've seen the old system pre-map. Now we work together as a team. You can see the young people more relaxed. It's the relationships, it's the glue that sticks you to the young person and enables you to work out how to minimize the damaged behavior. It's all about the relationships. It's the key to it all. I thought that was a very telling, quote from one of the members of staff that were interviewed. And also a further element in relation to the relationship with a child was that every single contact with a child, and it doesn't matter who has that contact, be it a cleaner, be it a cook, be it whoever, right? That every single contact with that child, young person, is important. Every single contact can have an impact on that young person. It can impact positively or negatively on. And when residential child staff began to really understand that they began to look at other things and how every single contact with the young person could be positive. Another aspect was the everydayness of residential childcare is so important. And what I mean by that is the importance of the ability to develop relationships and develop trust in the everyday. So, for instance, staff talked about settling young people for bed at night. You know, staff talking about going for walks with young people, just spending quality time with young people was so important. The everydayness of the residential childcare arena is absolutely crucial. I mean, staff talked about, if you knew the young person, say for instance, like potato, cheese, and onion crisps, where you want to ensure there were potato, one cheese, and onion crisps in the house. If you knew a young person liked a particular band, and you were in a shop and you saw a magazine with that particular band in it, well, buy the magazine. You know, though that everydayness, that ability to develop relationships, was absolutely crucial. And as I said previously, the 24/7 nature of residential childcare is demanding. It, 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 it can be difficult. It is. And the staff group needed to be able to work collaboratively across the 24/7 environment that is residential childcare staff and try to have a consistency of approach. So it was important that the staff we were on at night understood what the plan was, understood what the issues were, that there was better contact between the daytime staff and the nighttime staff, so that there was a consistency of approach, so that the young person, the approach to the young person would be the same at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, I understand at 2 o'clock in the morning, for instance, the young person could be under the influence of drugs or alcohol or whatever it happened to be. But that understanding that the behavior was coming from past trauma did appear to allow that consistency to be developed. Another element of relationships was relationships with other team members. And MAP encouraged staff to be open and honest with colleagues, to be open with them if they were having a bad day. One of the things that Matt always said was, look, leave your issues at the front door. When you come to work, leave any personal issues at the front door. And encourage staff to be open and honest with colleagues, that if we were, for instance, if they were having a bad day or if a young person's behavior was causing difficulties for them, begin to talk about those issues with other staff members, and that it wouldn't be seen as a failure and it wouldn't be seen as opting out of difficult circumstances or situations. It was about trying to understand as a group what was the best way to intervene with that child. Again, referring back to the everydayness and that every contact has an impact. So, for instance, one of the quotes was that, staff being honest, being able to be talked about it, that it's not a taboo anymore because of MAP. So people felt more able to say, look, tell you what, I'm having a bad day or whatever it was, or look, this type of behavior really triggers some of things in me, and I'm better if I can stand back a bit and you take more of a hands-on. So that other aspect of team members working collaboratively together was a positive one. The third relationship was with the young person's family. The understanding that despite all the difficulties and the issues, that the relationship the young person had with their family was so important. And it was so important for staff to understand that, despite them realizing that in order to develop that, the young person might be disappointed, i.e., you might have contact set up that the young person was looking for, but the family didn't turn up for all sorts of reasons, and that would impact on the young person. So MAP was advocating that the relationship that the young person had with their family must be a priority for staff when it is assessed as being safe to do so, right? I'll give you a quote just from a member of staff. He constantly gets let down by his family. They arrange contact, then don't turn up, and he is devastated. But family is so important to him that I have to put aside my own feelings and continue to work with the family to show them how important it is for him to see them, even if they can't look after him. MAP has shown me the importance of this. So again, those appear to be getting the whole concept appeared to be getting through to staff. The last element of relationships was relationships with the community, and developing positive relationships with with young people, with the local community is vital. And the research will tell you that it's vital to build self-esteem and self-identity for that young person. Again, one of the quotes from a member of staff was that when they came back from a particular MAP training session, they were working with a young lad who was a good footballer, and they knew of a football team that might help them. So they made contact with the club, explained to the club who the young person was, where he was coming from, and all that sort of business. And the club said, "No, great, come along, absolutely brilliant, come ahead." And it was so important for that young person. It did, as I've said, did develop his self-esteem. It did develop his self-identity, and he was just part of the group playing football. And the staff member said that the MAP training on that particular day helped her understand the need for her to do it, and for her to go a wee bit above and beyond, make contact with the club, go and see the club, the trainers and all beforehand, explain to them, and then sort of smooth the path for this young lad to go into the club. And it made such a difference for him. The second aspect of the findings was in relation to the training. And I've said that implementation science would tell us that that aspect of training for staff is so important. And part of the training was in relation to brain development and how that might impact on young people, and how trauma would impact on brain development. And again, I'll give you another quote. I love the training. The brain development aspect was like a light bulb moment for me and a lot of other team members. And that was in the context of what I was saying before, is the behavior is not directed at me. It might look it. And again, you might be getting verbally abused or called names, which is very difficult for staff to deal with. But that ability to understand that it's not me, that it's just because I'm here and how this young person is impacted by trauma, etc., that I'm getting it. So it's not about me as such, which helped them begin to better able, work with that young person. And then the last aspect in relation to relationships is what I would term perseverance. So research would show how important the stability of placements is for the young person. So that young person being in a placement through thick and thin is so important. And the term I used was perseverance or stickability, in that MAP help staff stick with young people through thick and thin, through good times and through bad times. And again, I'll give you a quote. When young people are having difficulties, MAP helps us see the need to stick with them, saying, I'm not going anywhere. I am still here. You're okay. And I will help you feel safe. And throughout my career, and there was one person whom I had some dealings with that came over here, a lady that wrote The Hackney Child. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but an adult writing about her experiences within the care system in Hackney in London. And she herself would say that, while she was in the care system, her behaviour wasn't exemplary, to say the least. And she would have run away a lot, etc. But the fact that when she contacted the home to say that she was ready to come back, they, on each and every occasion, they went and got her and picked her up and brought her home. She said that practice has impacted on her for the rest of her life. The ability, to build trust and for people to understand that she was worthy of going and getting picked up. And again, I think what it has done is that it has showed that MAP has helped staff realise the need to stick with young people through thick and thin, and to be there for them when they are having difficult times and bad times. And that is shown. I think our numbers for young people leaving care before their 18th birthday is minimal. It's planned. It's not unplanned. And our numbers of secure accommodation, they go up and down, but they have been decreased over since the implementation of MAP. The third aspect is what I would term the professional confidence of staff. A number of staff said that the fact that there was a model of practice and the fact that the training and there was theory behind it actually helped them understand that what they were doing already was good, that there was a theory behind it, that they were able to put what they were doing in some sort of theoretical framework, and it helped the residential childcare staff group to gain more professional confidence. One of the quotes was, "I believe MAP has given us as a group a tremendous sense of self-worth." And for me, residential childcare staff have more contact with young people, and I think know the young person better than any other profession because they're with them on a 24/7 basis. And it's so important for them to be able to articulate what they believe to be the right issues, and be it child protection case conferences, be it LAC reviews, whatever it happens to be. And a further quote that sort of backs that up is that MAP has given me the confidence to clearly articulate what I believe is the best for that young person. So again, a very positive impact. Now, the last aspect I talked about is congruence. And this was particularly important for me. I mean, when I was doing this, I had a researcher head on, but you can't take your senior manager head off as well. In relation to congruence, the research will tell you that for residential childcare to work well, the entire system within which it is placed needs to work well. So, for instance, one admission to a children's home can upset the balance, can really turn a children's home that's very stable, working very well. One young person's admission can flip it. And some of the staff were coming back saying that, my manager, I know, is clearly articulated to senior managers, look, we don't, even though we might have a spare bed, we don't believe that it's the right time to admit someone. Now, I, as a senior manager, have on occasion said, look, I hear that, but the risk element. So for me, it was important to hear it in the context of, congruence. So need to listen to residential childcare staff. Now, I'll be honest, it can't on occasions not admit people, but at least we need to be very much cognizant of how that might upset the apple cart in a children's home. The next issue is workforce stability, and we would have a lot of maybe bank staff and staff who were coming in, so we needed to ensure that the bank staff stayed relevant, and some of our employment processes were that people might have been on temporary contracts, and then they got a full-time contract, and as such they had to move children's home, or they had to go somewhere else, and then what does that do for your ability to build relationships? So the concept of workforce stability and the employment processes of organizations and how they impact on frontline residential staff is the issue. Another issue is the whole issue of bureaucracy and paperwork. And a number of staff said that paperwork can sometimes get in the way of their ability to be able to get out and kick a football with a young person, take them out for walks. And one of the things that we need to think about as a system is how do we minimize the paperwork? How do we free up residential childcare staff to develop those relationships? Because as I said, there's research that tell you that the relationship in itself is an intervention and actually builds up that trust and helps people develop, get self-identity and get self-esteem. So those were some of the issues that were identified that would hinder staff's ability to develop those relationships. So from an organizational perspective, it's so important to try and see or be clear what impact that will have on the residential childcare staff's ability to promote positive outcomes for young people. So in relation to some of the things that I think are important, if you're, and again in relation to the Northern Ireland framework, I think it's important to take cognizance of implementation science. What is it that implementation science is about? How do we do it? How do we utilize it? And what are the core issues? Relationships within residential childcare are absolutely key. They're the basis on which everything else is built on. They're the foundation of everything. And again, I've referred to the 24/7 nature of the residential environment can make that difficult. So it's important again organizationally to look to see, well, what are the factors that we can put in place that allow the development of those key relationships to blossom and take seed. And again, initially when we were introducing MAP, there was that concept of moving from connection or moving from control to connection. And again, some of the training would show that if you're trying to control someone who's in a very difficult space, the likelihood is that they're going to react. They're going to come at you. They're going to, like a cornered animal to some extent, and that in itself it's counterproductive. I mean, some staff, did feel that we were removing a tool from their toolbox, for want of a better phrase. But I think the implementation of MAP and the process that we put in place, I think helped move that and get staff to realize, that connection was by far the better process than control. And certainly the training helped that. It helped staff understand that if you're focusing on control in a children's home, then what that will lead to is a reaction from the young person. It'll heighten tension in the home. It'll create more confrontation, and will develop an atmosphere of distrust, which is self-perpetuating. The Another aspect I think we need to be very clear about is the therapeutic benefit of the day-to-day interactions, of the ordinary, of how you relate to people, how you engage with people. Every single interaction you have with someone is important, and depending on how you approach that interaction, it can have a negative or a positive impact. So you need to be aware that every single intervention you've had, and I talked about one of the motivations being to see if any of this learning would be beneficial for the implementation of the Northern Ireland framework. One of the reasons why I embarked on this, when I was a relatively young social worker, I remember visiting a children's home when I was working in London, and it had a long driveway up to like a big old building. And as I was driving in, I saw the young girl I was going to visit walking up the drive. So I parked my car and walked up the drive with her, and she was in the best of form coming from school, and everything was good. And I thought, oh, great. And we walked into the children's home, which had a big sort of large hall, and she sort of put her bag down in the corner. And the residential worker came out and shouted at her and said, "Don't put that there. What are you doing that for?" Right? And it immediately changed her whole demeanor. It immediately changed her attitude. It immediately changed everything. And I remember that day, and I reflect on it, and I think I should have said something to that guy. I should have done something, and I really didn't. And again, the whole issue that every exchange has a positive or negative value. And certainly, if any of you are in management and you've done some management courses, there can be a mantra that says, "Don't sweat the small stuff." But what I'm saying to you in relation to residential childcare, sweat the small stuff. It's the small everyday interventions that make a difference. And again, some of the things that we've learned is that MAP does ask staff to recognize where they've come from, recognize their own parenting skill, recognize things like that, which can be difficult for staff. And it asks people to, they understand, get in touch with the trauma and the issues that they're working with, and this can have quite an impact on staff, and can lead to burnout. So, an organisation, we need to be aware of vicarious trauma, and we need to try and support staff with that, and develop processes that will allow them to feel supported. Again, one of the things that we looked at was some of the training that we offered. We had initially, intermediate, foundation, intermediate, and complex training, and that was divided in amongst different staff groups. I think what we've learned is that if you're going to provide training, you provide it to the whole staff group, because everybody can develop relationships. And also, again, some of the supervision questions that we asked, and the feedback in relation to the tool that we developed, the MERS tool, was very positive. One quote was, "It can help you to look at ways of looking at things, give you different tools and strategies to engage with young people." But some of the feedback that we got from the questionnaires and the interviews was that some staff, particularly those ancillary staff, they didn't get supervision, and that's something that they should get, because everybody can develop a relationship. And lastly, what I'll do is that it really pointed out to me the difficult role residential childcare staff have, and the importance that if we provide the right environment for residential childcare staff, they can really make an impact for a positive impact on young people's lives, and how important that role is. I mean, a young person can spend a relatively short time in a residential home, but however they feel about that, or however that impact, be it positive or negative, can stay with them for the rest of their lives. And one of the things that we need to strive is to ensure that, despite a young person spending only a comparatively short time in the in the residential home, we need to do everything that will ensure and promote that the outcomes for that young person is positive, and it allows them to move on in the adulthood to become, beneficial and functioning citizens for society. So, folks, that's my presentation. I don't think it would talk as long as I did, but I've been talking nearly an hour. So, folks, I'm quite happy to take any questions or queries or whatever I see a couple of things in the chat. Okay.
There's one from Magdalena. When you mean the questionnaires were sent to all residential care staff, do you mean this includes both the statutory and voluntary sector care homes?
No, we just did it with our statutory Western Trust homes. So I think at the time there weren't any voluntary sector homes in the Western Trust area, but I think there are now. I know that, but no, it was to our statutory residential childcare staff group.
Dale has asked, does any of this interlink? Oh, somebody's just moved me there. With play therapy?
Well, I think what it does do is my view is that any type of therapy, if it is assessed as being needed, is good. But the one thing that I took out of this, the major thing, is that it's the development of the relationship between the young person and the staff group, and the everydayness of it is so important, and that relationship development in itself is an intervention which could then assist in further specialist interventions if they're needed and assessed as needed, be it play therapy or whatever it happens to be. And I think what I would say is that whatever therapies are being developed, they need to be needs to be joined up, for want of a better phrase. It needs to be holistic, and it needs to be meeting the assessed needs of that young person, and feedback to do it. So
I don't know if you're seeing the questions or not, Tom. David has asked, saying, thanks for your insight. Are there any specific MAP principle strategies being integrated into the new framework?
Well, my understanding is that a lot of, as I said at the start, the two frameworks are similar in that, they focus on trauma-informed practice and neurodevelopment as a means of understanding and enhancing the therapeutic response. So my understanding is that some of the principles and the strategies, are being integrated, because a lot of them are the same. When I doing this research, what I realized is that this was a homegrown model, and the other trusts were more established models, but there are a lot of similarities between them. A lot of the principles were the same, but I think for me, and again, in relation to implementing a process or an intervention, is the staff whom we got to deliver the training. The worker who was the MAP implementation officer, they had a great credibility with staff. They knew residential childcare inside out and were open to debates and discussions with staff. So it wasn't that we were saying, here, look, this is the final model. Certainly, one of the things about MAP, and I mean, I hope it's the same with the Northern Ireland framework, is that the feedback that you get, it will be constantly evolving. Will be taking consideration of staff's understanding. And one of the things about MAP is that, well, from staff's perspective, how could it be improved? What could we do differently? What are the issues? And I think one of the feedback that we got, and we had 4 elements of staff support in meetings, and the one element that was that sort of therapeutic meeting with the psychologist that had no managerial insight. In fact, I sat in on it one time to really just to see it, because I mean, I was an advocate that MAP was an excellent model. But with hindsight, I shouldn't have done it, because I felt that as a senior manager, I impacted on the discussion. So, okay, did MAP? Why do you all trust have a different?
That answers that. There's a few more. Why do all trusts have a different therapeutic model?
Well, as I said, the all trusts developed different. At the time in 2007, the DHSS didn't want to assign a particular model to anything, because they thought it might stifle development. But now the Northern Ireland Framework for Therapeutic Care is an integrated model that will across all 5 trusts. And again, did MAP introduce any interventions really accessible? No, I think one of the things that it did do was, again, just the, certainly when staff leave, or when young people leave, it can be a very worrying time for them, 18 out in the big wide yonder. And it's so important that there's, connections between, them with the home. And certainly I do see practice where people keep in touch, and the linkages between our 16+ team and residential childcare is quite good. Sorry, I'm just going on here.
You got it?
The joint commissioning groups. Well, I think, I mean, I suppose one of the things that I thought would, I mean, from a research perspective, I was encouraged to maybe share some of the learning, not because, I'm an expert, because I'm far from an expert, but it might help people, in different settings begin to think about it. So in relation to joint commissioning groups, I'm not sure what the Northern Ireland framework, but certainly those aspects that I talked about are very important across all spectrums. Yeah.
Can we email the new framework?
I haven't got access to it, but I can certainly, I don't know if there are people on the call that are involved in developing the framework. If they are, I mean, I can certainly get it sent out to people, or try and organize it for people.
Or if I had the link, we could send it out.
Yeah, I'll try and get that link.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just a few more comments there, Tom.
Well, that's good to hear. Look, see that the relationship is important. I've seen one young person I've worked with do a PhD and is also now a chief executive. See, at the end of the day, and I don't want to get too, I don't know, like sound like a vicar or a priest or religious stuff, but that's really that's fantastic. To get a young person that's come through the system with all the issues that we have, and to be able to do that, get a PhD, and fantastic, absolutely brilliant. So well done, Eileen, for a play. It's brilliant. And Suzanne, that's a lovely comment from Suzanne. I appreciate it. Suzanne helped me a lot within the research, so it was great. Thanks, Suzanne. Appreciate your help.
There's the link.
And then I think,
So Suzanne's just shared the link with us as well, so if you can pick it up yourselves. If not, we will share it when we're sending out our evaluation, etc. And I will see about getting it on the website beside the recording, so it's to be accessed from there as well.
I mean, I think that one from Ashley there about the bureaucracy. I mean, I think he's right. Following the independent review of childcare, and colloquially known as the Ray Jones review, there's processes going, and one of the processes is unnecessary bureaucracy. In fact, I chair the regional work stream, and one of the things that we're asking each trust to do is to identify issues where they think there's duplication, issues where they think there's paperwork that shouldn't be done. Now, not all paperwork is. Some paperwork is necessary. So the title of the group I chair is Reducing Unnecessary Bureaucracy. But I say, if you're working on is it the Southeastern Trust? Did I hear you say no? Aye. I mean, you should talk to your colleagues and see if there's anything that they could. There would be a lady from the Southeastern Trust that sits on that regional group, so you could check that out. I can't think of the person's name at the moment, but if you think there's some outdated stuff and whatever, then get rid of it. As long as it doesn't impact on your ability to deliver, service or delegated statutory functions or anything of that nature, then, my view would be get shot of it. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? Can I unmute?
Oh, that's great.
Tom, sorry, can I just ask, I know I'm coming from Voipic, so I've be aware of MAPS, and I know we had done some research around from a young person's perspective, but has there been any further kind of findings of the impact on MAP from a young person's point of view about how the relationships have improved or improved the outcomes from them, from their perspective?
No, because John and I was part-time and I was doing my job and all at the same time, I didn't do that. But part of the research, I didn't go into it, but part of what I did was look from a research perspective at some of the things that young people said. So bear with me a second. And a lot of it was, their views about the relationship, about being treated with respect, about staff being normal, for want of a better phrase, not being all jargonized, or the fact of spending the everydayness with them. Bear with me 1 second. Hold on, I'll just try and. I've got me duck. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff would be, for instance, some research would show that, for instance, young people were dissatisfied with the residential childcare placement when staff adopted an inconsistent or unduly harsh approach to them. So back to what about consistency. So you could try and, if you're dealing with someone at 4 in the morning, try your best to deal with them the same as you would at 4 in the afternoon. Now that's not easy, and depending on the circumstances at 4 in the morning, but if you have that in your head, that needs to be consistency, and every intervention you do has got an impact. That's so important. And again, youth, again, research show youth who saw their group home staff as more fair and helping them learn things were more likely to have positive outcomes. And young people who felt staff care about me and staff are fair were significantly less likely to display negative outcomes. So, they were the research about young people's perspective on residential childcare would fit in with a lot of the stuff that, for instance, there's a study from I won't bore you with it, but 27 young people in residential childcare noted their views on the characteristics of staff who made them feel safe. And I mean, amongst these views, they stuck with me through it all. I never felt alone. And then another one said, really building relationships with the kids' work because when they feel safer to come, then they feel safer to come with you with pretty much any problem. Another view was for trusted staff that hang in with you. And a further view was that we want workers that actually show they care, not just say they care. They just sit with us, talk to us, and you know what I mean? They just socialize. So, you know, some of the research that did have taken place with young people would back up that their view of what we were trying to do was
Yeah.
was,
And
yeah.
that's really interesting, Tom, because get into the children's homes as well, and as an advocate, and you're advocating for them, a lot of what you're saying is still ringing true to this day and age. I mean, if MAPS was way back 2007 right through to now when we've got the new therapeutic model, and those quotes there are still resonating to this day, and it is always about the relationship that we talk to the young people about, or that they're talking to us about, is the relationship that they have with the staff, and that is a foundation of, you know, a cornerstone of the success of residential care, or making residential care successful for a child.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, I mean, as you know, Don, I've been around a long time, but you know, the thing that really, if you were to ask me, if somebody said to you, I mean, my thesis is 242 pages long. Now, I'm not saying that just to be impressed, but if you were to say to me, give me one thing that you think makes a difference, it's understanding that the everydayness, every interaction has a consequence. If you try and think of them, and this is, you know, for parents, for people who are parents, try and think about them as you would maybe think about your own children. I.e., if you knew they were interested in a particular band and you saw a magazine, you'd buy them. If you knew they'd like potato cheese down your crisps, you'd get them in the house. That type of thing. You know, we, as I say, sweat the small stuff. It's the wee things that matter. It's the everydayness that matters. If you
and again, that resonates. Yeah, that resonates with us as well as the ordinary everyday things, the drives in the car, those that are so important, that they value so much. So MAPS, I can see where MAP really did work in that respect when it does relationship, and it'll take time now for this new therapeutic model to embed completely into practice as well. But the cornerstone of that is about relationships. So if we can get that right, you know, a lot of things will fall into place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some of the comments, and I just noticed that one's from Lynn Connor, who's one of our psychologists, who was not the psychologist that developed it, but one of the psychologists that really pushed it on. It was part of our care team. So, I mean, it was Lynn that, you know, was impressing upon me that everydayness, that you know, they like potato cheese, onion crisps, or tomato ketchup, or whatever it is. So it was heartening for me as a senior manager, but also as a researcher in this context, that a lot of the research backed up what we were saying, if you know what I mean. So it gives, and I can understand now where some of the residential childcare staff are saying that the MAP model gave them a lot of confidence. You know, we're able to, you know, articulate more, what's the word, strongly for that young person, whereas maybe previously they wouldn't have done. But, and again, another thing I took from it is how difficult residential childcare work is, and how difficult it is to develop those relationships in the midst of all, particularly for, you know, homes where we've got 8 young people in it, or, you know, the numbers matter, you know, but, you know, I mean, I'm biased, but I think our children's home staff are great, and MAP has certainly contributed to that. And see, again, Lynn talked about they're doing a presentation. Sorry, bear with me. The Leeds Northern Framework Leads are presenting on the framework in March, and can help connect a presentation from Tom. So that's good. And I think, you know, the framework would be good, would be great, because a lot of discussion and, you know, development has taken place within it. And I think they've learned from not only the Western Trust in this context, but also all our other trusts and you know, internationally and regionally as well. Because a lot of the research that I've done was international. You know, it wasn't, you know, it was from all over the world. So there you go.
A lot of questions for you today, Tom. Thank you very much.
Oh no, great. I really enjoyed it, to be honest.
Good, and technology worked for us. That was great. So unless anyone has any other questions, or if you want to get in touch with Tom, you can send them and we can pass them on. As I said earlier, today's presentation has been recorded and it will be available on the website. So thank you very much, Tom, again, and we'll share the feedback with you. And thank you everyone for coming, and just look out for our future lunchtime seminars. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. I really appreciate all your help.